Have you ever considered Art the Clown's timeline? Not just his backstory or his motivation for killing people, but the sequence of events that take place in the Terrifier universe and which order they happen in. This person has. This one too. This guy's given it a lot of thought. He's in a room still typing somewhere. Much of this consideration, however, begins and ends with the idea that the events of All Hallows Eve are completely unrelated to the Terrifier universe. And while this may be true, though I can't find the original source to back it up, it's easy to see why others, like myself, still believe that All Hallows Eve could take place in the Terrifier universe. And I could go on for days about both the subtle and overt connections between the three films. But what matters most, and what many don't seem to consider, is the fact that the franchise canon could change at any time, something director Damien Leone actually affirmed himself in a Reddit AMA just after the release of Terrifier 2. The point here is that the Terrifier franchise is an ever-evolving and enigmatic universe, which means that if All Hallows Eve isn't part of it now, it could become part of it at any given moment. Which got me thinking, if Damien Leone wanted to unify every Art the Clown event into a single timeline, would it even be possible? And if so, what would it look like? Well, this is gonna take some time, and the final result might look a little conspiratorial.
Oh shit, buddy, I gotta dig a little deeper.
But be patient and stick with me, because if you've been thinking about this as much as I have, then it will definitely be worth it. And that brings me to this comment. You see, if you remove the wraparound segment from All Hallows Eve, a timeline begins to form, which fits neatly within the universe and spans the entire franchise. Starting with the Ninth Circle. The Ninth Circle begins with a woman named Casey entering a train station on Halloween night. The station in question is named Realmsville, which seems to hold some significance, but more on that later. Casey encounters Art the Clown, who toys with her for a bit before drugging her. Casey awakens underground in what is presumably a subterranean level of the train station, where she encounters monsters, witches, demons, and a homeless person, and ultimately, Satan himself. The Ninth Circle culminates with Casey being the victim of a non-consensual satanic sex ritual. We all know this story by now, right?
That was sick!
But if we had to place this on a timeline of Art the Clown events, the most logical place would be at the beginning. And this is for two big reasons. The first is that the Ninth Circle is the first piece of media ever to feature Art the Clown, which means that in terms of production, the Ninth Circle is the beginning of Art's story. The second and more important reason is that the Ninth Circle is the only time ever that the audience sees Art as simply a man in a clown costume and clown makeup. All other media thus far to feature Art the Clown shows him with distorted, inhuman features. Even in Terrifier 2016, when Art is said to be human, he still looks like this. But the Ninth Circle is different. In fact, Tia clarifies this in All Hallows Eve when she tells Sarah,
He was just a man in a costume. Someone like that could really exist, right? Like a serial killer, I mean.
Now, many will point out that Art's features do indeed take an inhuman turn in his final moments at the train station, and while this is certainly true, my position is that it's not an indication of supernatural abilities. Rather, it's the beginning stages of a transformation that's happening to Art, one that's directly related to his relationship with Satan. And this transformation is a slow process that extends across the entire timeline. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Suffice to say that Art the Clown's subservience to Satan has granted Satan the ability to enter and take possession of Art. And the glowing eyes seem to be an integral part of this, and likely a physical manifestation of demonic possession, a symptom that Art just so happens to share with the only other character in the series that's heavily implied to be controlled by Satan. But you never forget your first time, and Art's was in the train station, in the 9th circle. But where does Art go after the kidnapping is done and the initial possession is over? Well, invigorated with satanic energy and a groovy new look, Art walks right out of the train station and onto the streets of Miles County, where the same night Terrifier 2016 takes place. A newly transfigured Art the Clown leaves the train station and heads right into the arms of Tara and Dawn, who are likely coming from the same costume party as these two from the 9th circle. The feature-length Terrifier commences with Art stalking Tara and Dawn through Miles County, butchering anyone that gets in his way. Art follows the two leading ladies to an abandoned building where, by the halfway point in the movie, he's killed both of them. Art then turns his focus to Tara's sister, Victoria, who had come looking for Tara and Dawn at the abandoned building. Art stalks Victoria for the rest of the film, taking out numerous side characters in the process. The climax of the film sees Art catch up with Victoria, who he mutilates and disfigures before the police arrive, who witness Art end things on his own terms. The film ends with Art's body being brought to the morgue, where he attacks the coroner after being resurrected by an unknown force. And it's right about here that the timeline of the films can get a bit confusing, so let's break it down. Terrifier opens with Art watching daytime television personality Monica Brown as she interviews a disfigured Victoria. Art proceeds to smash the television before applying his makeup and preparing his weapons. But this scene, in actuality, takes place 1 year after the events of the film. In fact, this scene from Terrifier is actually this scene from Terrifier 2. And since this means that the real beginning and where Art was coming from when he first met Tara and Dawn is still, as of now, unknown, it adds to the idea that the true beginning of the first Terrifier isn't this scene, which takes place a year in the future. It's this scene from the 9th circle. And if you've ever wondered why Art already seems to have these ghoulish demonic features, even underneath the makeup, it's because by the time this scene actually takes place during Terrifier 2, the satanic possession and demonic transfiguration of Art the Clown has long since started. And this is why Art is resurrected at the end of Terrifier, because Satan's influence on him has been growing stronger with every evil deed that Art commits. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Pale Girl in all of this, because she's there with Art, watching the Monica Brown interview. In fact, she's the one who shows it to him. This means that the Pale Girl was always part of this scene from the first Terrifier. We just didn't see her, which begs the question, what other scenes was she part of that we're not aware of? We'll come back to this idea very soon, but first, let's revisit the timeline. A newscast in Terrifier 2 places the events of the first Terrifier in 2017.
Survivor of the Miles County Massacre of 2017, which left 8 people dead and Hayes in critical condition.
So if the first Terrifier takes place in 2017, then it would follow that Terrifier 2 takes place in 2018. But since Art was resurrected the same night that he died, the million-dollar question is, where was Art for an entire year between massacres? Well, aside from the glaring potential for a Terrifier midquel that would take place during this time period, there's a more important reason for this portion of the timeline, as it connects two separate events from the Terrifier universe, with the first being the death of Sienna and Jonathan's father at the hands of Art the Clown. Terrifier 2 never gives a concrete answer as to when Sienna and Jonathan's father died, but the film does provide enough clues about him to come to a solid conclusion about what happened. We know that his death was a relatively recent event by the way characters make reference to it.
It's just a phase, Sienna, and it'll pass.
It's about a year ago.
Yeah, well, he lost his father.
In fact, the sketchbook belonging to him contains, among other things, newspaper clippings about the murders that are committed in the first film.
Did you put these in here?
No.
This definitively places his death after the events of the first Terrifier, and more precisely, at some point during the same year's worth of time that Art was missing. Now, Sienna and Jonathan never talk specifically about how their father died, but we do get the official story from Sienna's friend Brooke when she gossips about it to her boyfriend.
Get back in the car.
He had like this giant brain tumor that, I don't know, it just made him do all this fucked up shit. And he was like seeing things, and he got really abusive towards the end, especially towards Sienna. So one day, he drank a whole bottle of Jack, and he got in his car, and he drove straight into one of those transformer things. And the car caught fire, and he got trapped in the wreck, and he burned to death. You can hear him screaming from a mile away.
I don't know about you, but this story never sat right with me. There's just something too coincidental about a normal man tormented by visions of a killer clown and his victims, who then dies in a completely unrelated car accident. And I believe Terrifier 2 purposely obscures the time frame of his death as to keep viewers from realizing that both Art the Clown and the Pale Girl, who met the same night as the events of the first Terrifier in 2017, were out there together somewhere in the world when Sienna and Jonathan's father died, because I'm convinced he was killed by Art at the direction of the Pale Girl. What really caused his death, I believe, was something like this. Or this. Either scenario would cause the sibling's father to lose control of his vehicle, leading to a deadly crash that would almost certainly be ruled an accident. And this would actually fit the motivation of the Pale Girl, as she seems hell-bent on directing Art to kill every member of the Shaw family, including the mother. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that Art was involved in Mr. Shaw's death. And I'm so sure of this that I believe it will be revealed in Terrifier 3. But this year's worth of time that Art and the Pale Girl were missing is important for another reason. Because, as the visions were coming to an abrupt end for Mr. Shaw, for another artist, they were just beginning. Before we get into this segment, I want to show you this clip from Terrifier 2.
Restaurants on the East Coast have recalled romaine lettuce due to a recent E. coli outbreak. At least 12 people have been hospitalized and 2 are in critical condition.
Now, this is something I never see talked about, but it's a scene that has always stood out to me because this story is way too specific for it to simply be a throwaway newscast. Leone and company actually took the time to build a hospital set. They even went as far as to shoot rotting brown lettuce in a supermarket to emphasize the E. coli outbreak, which, if you're not aware, is a bacteria found in feces that's most often contracted by oral ingestion. And since we're all well aware of just how much Art the Clown loves to smear his shit all over everything, and since the Pale Girl's got some shit issues too, it seems likely that they're responsible. And since the news report mentions the East Coast being affected rather than New York or Miles County, it all seems to imply that not only has Art been playing with his poop again, but that he's been traveling too. Whether he made his way to some vegetable processing plant or simply boarded a truck carrying a bunch of lettuce, all signs point to Art being on the move with the pale girl in tow. So in the second segment of All Hallows Eve, when Caroline wants to get away from the city, presumably New York since that seems to be the epicenter of Terrifier activity, she moves into a new home with her artist husband in a place that's more rural. Let's say Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, or somewhere in that vicinity, and they have no idea what's coming for them.
I'm standing by my window. You know what I hear outside right now? Listen. You hear that?
No, what is it?
It's nothing. You know what 8 o'clock in the city sounds like?
Like stress?
Exactly.
Caroline's husband is a professional artist, but his newest work has been causing her distress.
It's a face. It's just a horrible face. Honestly, I can't even be in the same room as this thing. I had to put a sheet over it.
Caroline's husband, John, claims that he has no recollection of creating this painting.
According to him, he doesn't even remember painting it. He swears he was in some sort of trance or something. All he remembers is waking up from this terrible nightmare with this image in his head, and the next morning, there's this painting in the living room.
And as it gets later, an object from the sky crashes near the couple's property. John calls to say he's on his way home.
John?
Hey, there you are.
Where are you?
I'm headed back now. I tried calling the house, but I couldn't get through.
Only for the call to be dropped moments later.
John! God damn it!
Caroline attempts to fix the resulting power outage, but she soon realizes she's being stalked by an alien. Caroline valiantly attempts to fight the alien off, while the alien tries to stick an eel-like creature down Caroline's throat. Caroline manages to break away and lock herself inside of a closet. John calls just in time to hear the screams of his wife before she's dragged away by the alien. And as the segment ends, it's revealed that John's newest work is a painting of Art the Clown. But what's Art's connection to John and Caroline? Well, we know that John was having visions of Art, just like Mr. Shaw was. And we also know that these visions were beginning to impact his art, again like Mr. Shaw.
Daddy drew this?
We're also fairly certain, in the case of Mr. Shaw, that these visions are part of some divine revelation or divine intervention that would ultimately stop Art and the Pale Girl and prevent them from completing whatever mission they're on. Which means that these visions are a threat, not just to Art and the Pale Girl, but to the entity that's working behind the scenes to influence them. And that means that it will stop at nothing to eliminate anyone that's related to these visions, as we saw attempted in Terrifier 2. So if someone else in a different part of the country was receiving these visions too, you bet your sweet ass that Satan, working through the Pale Girl, would direct Art to take them out too. Which means that Art and the Pale Girl would need to travel to their location to kill the couple. But we can take this idea even further because of what Damien Leone said in the Terrifier 2 director's commentary.
A lot of people think this is just merely a dream sequence, and it's not.
Leone explains that this scene isn't just a dream sequence, but a divine test that Sienna has to go through, which takes place within her subconscious within a dream. He then further explains the purpose of this scene.
The forces of good that are wanting to appoint Sienna or anoint her as the chosen one, so to speak, to combat Art, she has to be tested first. If she doesn't approach this in the right way, and if she's not courageous at the end and doesn't decide to fight back against Art, then she will not be the one. If she cowers, it's over. It's over. It's over.
That's right. I submit to you that Caroline's experience with the alien was a divine test, just like Sienna's, which was bestowed upon her because of the visions that her husband John had been receiving. But how do aliens fit into all of this? Well, it's already been established that things like monsters, witches, demons, and even Satan all exist in this universe. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say aliens do too. But I don't think the alien was real. I think that Caroline, like Sienna, subconsciously sensed the threat that was heading her way. So, when she went to sleep, again like Sienna, her subconscious manifested this threat as a dream within her psyche about some otherworldly, supernatural invader that wants to take her away. And the forces of good used this as a divine test of her will, which she ultimately failed, and therefore disappeared by the time Art arrived at her home, or simply died in her sleep, just like Sienna would have had she failed her own test.
And if she's not courageous at the end and doesn't decide to fight back, it's over.
But what about those phone calls and Caroline's husband? Well, those phone calls were part of the dream too. And as for John, well, he's already dead. Again, possibly by something like this or this, with either scenario directed by the Pale Girl at the behest of Satan, who needs to eliminate all potential threats in order to carry out his plans. So, knowing John is dead and realizing Caroline is no longer a threat, the Pale Girl advises Art to head back to Miles County, where the 1-year anniversary of his killing spree in the first Terrifier is quickly approaching. And it's somewhere along this route where he meets another wayward traveler headed for New York. It's just after midnight on October 31st, somewhere in Pennsylvania.
Halloween is officially here.
A costume designer coming from a film shoot stops for gas on a desolate road.
And I'll be joined by Pennsylvania's favorite host.
But once she arrives, however, it seems that no one's there. Until...
Fuck out of here, man!
The costume designer encounters an angry attendant
all over the place and smear your shit on the walls?
kicking out a shit-covered Art the Clown.
What the fuck is wrong with you? I'm giving you 10 seconds or I'm gonna call the cops.
Who sets his sights on the woman before taking off into the night. The costume designer speaks casually with the gas station attendant about their encounter with the ominous clown, before revealing her predicament and the reason she's out there.
I'm actually kind of lost.
Oh, well, where are you headed?
New York.
Where are you coming from?
Outbreak.
That's right. The reason that Art is in rural Pennsylvania is because he's traveling back to New York, just like the unnamed costume designer, and they encounter each other because they're both coming from the same place, Outbreaksville, Pennsylvania. Now, I know some people will take issue here with Art's appearance, which has gone from this to this since the last time we saw him. And though this could easily be explained away by budgetary limitations and a different actor playing the character, I'd like to harken back to the transformation angle, because Leone states, again in his Terrifier 2 commentary, that Sienna is going through some kind of transcendent metaphysical journey that seems to ultimately be transforming her into a tool of divine good.
If you notice, they all have luggage, and there's a pilot and a stewardess. That's all a reflection of Sienna's wings.
And I really like this idea because I think it mirrors my theory about Art's transformation. Because, if you don't already know, Sienna and Art the Clown have parallel story arcs. Sienna is resurrected and healed at the end of Terrifier 2, and goes on to, at least momentarily, defeat the evil that plagues the film. Meanwhile, Art the Clown is resurrected at the end of the first Terrifier, and is healed the very same night, which allows him to come back stronger than ever, just like Sienna. In fact, Leone states that going forward, Art and Sienna are on an equal playing field, because ever since Sienna's resurrection, just like Art, she's now immortal and supernatural. So, while Sienna is being transformed by a divine entity, likely God, into a holy weapon whose destiny it is to defeat evil, Art the Clown is going through a similar transformation, but instead of being turned into an instrument of good, he's being transformed into a weapon of pure evil. But instead of it being from God, it's straight from the devil. And because of this, I think the change in Art's appearance can be explained by the fact that his transformation is ongoing, and his appearance is therefore in flux. And the same goes for Sienna, who may eventually go on to literally have wings, just like the character her father created for her, because her ultimate destiny may be that she's being transformed into an angel, while it seems that Art's destiny is to be transformed into a full-blown demon. But perhaps the best explanation for the change in Art's appearance is yet to come, and we'll explore that at the end of the video. But for now, let's get back to the segment. Left alone, the costume designer goes looking for the attendant in the gas station. And that's when shit gets real. Realizing the extent of her situation, the costume designer flees the gas station. The woman attempts to call for help until she realizes that her nightmare is just beginning. Now, when I said earlier that the pale girl may have been in scenes with Art that the audience isn't aware of, I was talking specifically about this segment. Not just because it fits with the previously established timeline
Can't be real.
and Art traveling, but because, as we learned in Terrifier 2, the entity controlling the pale girl is a shapeshifter. This fact about the pale girl can help resolve so many of the unanswered questions that plagued the Terrifier short film, like who was in the van that ostensibly forced the costume designer off the road and curiously kept driving instead of stopping to see if she was okay, and who was responsible for disfiguring a woman's face on the side of the road when Art and the costume designer were seemingly miles away. And finally, how Art can essentially be in more than one place at the same time. An ability that he's never been able to demonstrate before or since this segment. All of this can be explained by factoring in the pale girl, because it isn't actually Emily Crane. It's an evil spirit taking the form of Emily Crane. And if it can take her form and the form of Sienna and Jonathan's mom, it can certainly be a reckless driver or a mangled woman on the side of the road, or even Art the Clown himself, which would explain how the costume designer can leave Art behind, only for him to appear out of nowhere, wherever she is. Because Art doesn't have powers like this, but the entity controlling the pale girl does. And with that entity in tow, Art can know exactly where he needs to be. And all of this could be done to create a nightmarish environment, to make the costume designer feel helpless, like there's no escape.
This can't be real.
But why target her? Well, it could be that Art's just having fun, you know, like with Allie. But it's possible that the costume designer is related to Sienna and Jonathan. Probably not a sibling, but possibly a cousin, or maybe a sister to one of their parents, which would fit with the sibling motif that runs through the franchise. After all, we're never told the costume designer's last name, and she is heading to New York. So, if Art and the pale girl really were on the move during the year that they were missing, maybe it's because they were traveling the country, killing off the extended family of both artists that were receiving divine visions, which would actually work really well as a sort of Terrifier 1.5. But the costume designer doesn't know this because she thinks this story is about her. So, after wounding Art, the costume designer makes one last attempt at escaping, flagging down a passerby who picks her up.
Everything's gonna be fine.
Only for Art to appear alongside of them, killing the driver and causing the car to crash. But that's not our ending. Art loads the woman into his vehicle and along with the pale girl heads back towards New York. reaching Miles County by sunrise. There, he brings the unconscious woman into his lair. Yes, Art has a lair, and once inside, he goes to work on the woman before being healed and cleaning himself up, just like in the laundromat. Meanwhile, Monica Brown is preparing to interview a disfigured Victoria, who will go on to attack her later that morning. As the interview takes place, Art puts his costume back on and reapplies his makeup before becoming enraged at the assertion that he's dead. He prepares his weapons, gathers his things, and heads out the door onto the streets of Miles County because it's that very day, Halloween 2018, that the events of Terrifier 2 finally take place. Whew. Okay, I'll admit, so that definitely took some wrenching, but we finally have it, a single, unified, linear timeline of Art the Clown events. And yeah, as predicted, it's definitely a little Pepe Sylvia. But I actually think it works really well, and most of the pieces fit together rather neatly, and I wanted to emphasize this idea, to show that this is still possible, that it's not over till it's over, that Leone could take all of these disparate pieces and retrofit them onto a single timeline that brings both the Terrifier and All Hallows Eve universes into one large story. And because Damien Leone could decide to do this at really any time, until we're given more information, this is now my headcanon. But I want to hear from Terrifier fans. What do you think? Does my timeline work, or would you have done it differently? If so, what order would you place the segments in? Or do you just write this off as fan fiction, standing in proud opposition of this video, insisting that All Hallows Eve isn't canon to the rest of the franchise? I genuinely want to know, because I rarely see people discussing how all these different stories and segments can fit together. And I think it's one of the most interesting aspects of the Art the Clown saga, because there's just so many possibilities. Now, I won't get into the events of Terrifier 2, because we've covered so much of it already, and since Terrifier 3 is yet to come out, the only question left is how to explain the wraparound segment from All Hallows Eve. To do this, we have to travel all the way back to the 9th Circle.
He's gonna drug you and take you to the witches.
Knock it off.
Lots of people think that All Hallows Eve takes place in a separate universe from the Terrifier films, while others believe that all Art the Clown events take place in a single universe. But I think there's a third option. So, remember this sign from the 9th Circle? Well, I don't think it's just a name for the train station. I think it's an indicator that the train station is a nexus for other dimensions. This would explain why the devil and his coven of demons and witches are conducting business underneath a random train station in what is presumably New York City. Because this isn't just a train station, it's a teleportation station, and one of its destinations is hell. This is why there's no escape for the women that are trapped, and why there's hideous creatures around every corner, and why even the homeless people are murderous monsters. But it doesn't end with the 9th Circle, because there's allusions to the idea of more than one universe throughout All Hallows Eve. It starts out subtle with a brief shot of the alien somehow appearing in the children's house. But it becomes more obvious when the babysitter receives a phone call from the costume designer.
This isn't funny. Who is this?
Please! The killer's out here is following me!
Who's following you?
The man! He's in a clown costume! He's trying to kill me!
And it's all but confirmed by the end of the film, when Art comes through the television and kills the children. But Art would need an access point to do this, and if the access point is beneath the train station, which the 9th Circle seems to imply, and which happens to bear a strong resemblance to the room Art is in when he comes through the TV, then we can say with certainty that what we see taking place in All Hallows Eve is in two separate universes, the babysitter universe and the tape universe. But that's not what's important, because most people already know this. What is important is that just because these two universes are different doesn't mean that the Terrifier universe and the tape universe aren't the same. This can help us understand the change in Art's appearance, because when we watch All Hallows Eve, we're seeing Art the way the babysitter and the children see him, and in their universe, he looks like this. But to the people in his own universe, he looks like this. We can think of the babysitter universe as similar to our own. It acts as a representation of the quote-unquote real world, where things like monsters, witches, and aliens don't exist. And I think that's really the point of the film, that by watching these creatures, the characters give them more validity until they're so real in the minds of the characters that they're able to creep through the television into the real world. Anyone familiar with the concept of a tulpa, or more precisely, a thought form, or egregore, will know what I mean here.
Do you think that clown was real?
That these entities actually existing in the seemingly ordinary world is entirely dependent on the collective beliefs and emotions that are fed into them by a specific group of people.
Clown's only on the video, right? So if you don't watch it, he can't hurt you.
In the case of All Hallows Eve, it's the babysitter and the children that inadvertently will these beings into their own reality by watching the tape, which results in all three characters fearing and believing in them more with each passing minute. And that got me thinking. If the babysitter universe is a stand-in for our own, and the characters in All Hallows Eve bring Art into their world by watching the VHS tape, then what if that's what Art is doing to us in our universe? Only, instead of him needing us to watch the VHS tape, he needs us to watch the Terrifier films. And what if, by watching them, we're inviting Art into our own reality? That would mean that with every new fan and every new film, Art the Clown is getting closer and closer to becoming real.
Do you think that clown was real? Someone like that could really exist, right?